What are your tips for someone who's interested in learning more or just getting started that wants this radical rest?
Oh, yeah. You start right this second. Right now.
How?
Just right now. Let's do it together.
Okay.
Take a moment, whether you're walking or sitting or whatever it is that you're doing, just stop whatever it is that you're doing. And if it's comfortable, you can close your eyes. If not, you can keep your eyes open, keep your gaze soft, roll your shoulders back, take a deep breath in. Nice long exhale. Good. We're going to do that 2 more times, just 2 clearing breaths. Inhale through your nose.
I'm not in a yoga studio, at least not yet anyway. I'm in my room speaking virtually to yoga, meditation, and mindfulness teacher Rosi Acosta. She's also a podcast host and author of You Are Radically Loved, a healing journey to self-love. And we're both meditating, taking a deep inhale and exhale as we take a moment for ourselves.
Take a deep breath in. Nice long exhale. Lower your chin, and then you can blink your eyes open when you're ready.
That was so nice.
That was almost 3 minutes of your life. And tell me if there's a difference in how you feel.
Oh, there's a difference in the room. It's like, it's not just you, it's everything around you. It's so nice. Manolo,
yeah.
Did you love that? Even in the studio, they loved it. Like, this is not my first time meditating. I actually meditate every morning, or at least I try to. And I have been doing this for 14 years now. What started with a 2-minute daily sit is now a 30 to 40-minute one, when time permits, or I make the time. My practice has gotten deeper, but the questions of life still remain. Today, Rosie is going to tell us all about how she got into the practice of meditation and how it changed her life. And later, we're going to hear from the incredible yoga teacher, Susanna Barkataki, on how yoga and meditation go hand in hand, and more importantly, how she's creating an inclusive and diverse yoga community. My name's Christopher Rivas, and this is Brown Enough, Stories Between Black and White. Here we go. There's a chapter in my book, Brown Enough, called Always Lie When Someone Asks If You Meditate. You see, I was first introduced to meditation after lying to someone I wanted to impress. This woman came up to me in college and she asked me, "Chris, do you meditate?" And I said yes. I had never meditated a day in my life, but she was cool and I wanted her to think I was cool, and so I lied. I know, pretty mature, right? I was in my early 20s. Give me a break. Anyway, we started dating and I was able to maintain this lie for close to a year. And then on my 21st birthday, she bought me a plane ticket to Barre, Massachusetts to attend a 7-day silent retreat. Yes, 7 days of complete silence. Now, instead of telling her the truth, I took the plane ticket and went to this silent retreat with her. After never meditating, this is an intense way to jump in. And yet, it was the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life, and it was also the most freeing thing I've ever done in my life. That's where the magic began. It was life-changing for me. Meditation changed my life. I share this with you because being a brown kid from Queens, meditation didn't really exist in my sphere or in my world. It was unheard of. And now that I live in Los Angeles, you hear about meditation all the time. Mainly it's like meditate to become a better CEO, or meditate to be more successful or accomplish more things. I feel like we've come pretty far from the source of what meditation is all about. And then in these yoga classes or sitting sessions, I rarely see brown folks who look like me. And I know I'm not the only one. Rosie is a Latina from East LA, and growing up, her view of yoga was actually quite different.
Well, I mean, when you grow up in LA, you kind of hear about it. You might see it occasionally. It's kind of a weird thing. I think for us too, growing up in a Hispanic household, it was very cultish. to us. Like it seemed like something very weird and strange. And so I think that was really my first initial exposure. But when I was a teenager, I was suffering from debilitating panic attacks and I had anxiety. I was in the middle of just a really difficult time, as teenage delinquents have. And it was suggested to me by a friend of my mom's who she worked with at the Children's Hospital in Hollywood that I try meditation as a way to quell my anxiety and my stress. And I was, completely in a state of like freeze. I would get these panic moments where I could it was very akin to agoraphobia. But at the time, nobody really understood why I was having these bouts of panic.
Why were you having these bouts of panic?
Well, considering that most of my childhood was spent in a state of chaos, in a gang-riddled environment with drive-by shootings and seeing somebody get shot and stabbed and just being in this really chaotic environment in East LA. So everybody had PTSD. So it wasn't like a source of inquiry. It just was the norm. So I think at that time, we just didn't know what it was. We didn't know what the panic was. And I had just suffered a immense loss. My two childhood best friends had been killed during the El Nino storm. They drowned in the LA River. And so, I was kind of going through it, and my mom came home with these pamphlets about meditation, and I was really into new agey things at the time, and it seemed like something outside of the Catholic norm that I was indoctrinated in. And so I just quickly took to it. I read the little pamphlet and decided to venture off to the Self-Realization Fellowship. It happened that the pamphlets that I was reading were from this old yogi from the 1930s called Paramahansa Yogananda. And if people are familiar with yoga at all, he was the author of Autobiography of a Yogi,
Great
which
book.
for a lot of people, they recognize that text. And so that was my introduction to it.
Rosie was 15 when she was first introduced to the practice of meditation. And she says her journey of learning was rough. Paying attention to the moment often created a level of anxiety for her, but she eventually worked her way through it.
I found that my meditation, when I first started, it was more reading about meditation than it was actually doing meditation. And so little by little, I started to just take moments in the morning to be still, listen to the sounds of the city when I was walking to school, or, just going to a local park. Prospect Park by downtown LA was one of my favorite hangs. So that's what it looked like for me. And after a few years, then it became a sit-down practice where I was able to actually incorporate it as something that I did daily.
Now she's a yoga, meditation, and wellness teacher. She's worked with a wide range of students all over the world, from those in her community to Olympic athletes, NFL champions, and NBA stars. You are a Latina woman. One of the main reasons I wanted you on here is because I am very in love with the practice of meditation. There are not a lot of people who look like us in that world. You found it in a pamphlet by Yogananda, a brown man. What did you see a lot of people who looked like you in this world that you were entering more seriously?
Oh, no. I didn't even see brown people like Yogananda practicing when I first started. When I first started practicing yoga specifically, I'd have to travel to the West Side to go to a yoga studio, and everybody on the West Side does not look like me. So it was a little bit of a trying exercise. In fact, I write about this initial experience in my book, where I talk about how here I am finally taking the steps to create a practice that's going to serve my highest good. And yet, just like there wasn't any role models for me growing up of what success looked like, I also didn't have any role models of what this was going to look like in this world, right? Specifically in the world of wellness. At the time, it was very white, and I did struggle at times with certain things. We grow up in the society, especially in, let's talk about meditation specifically, or mindfulness specifically, which is where I like to live in that space. This idea of letting go of your identity, of who you are, transcending that identity and achieving the state of non-attachment and letting go. And although that it's a great goal to have as a Hispanic woman, like as brown people, our identity is locked into the fact that we come from these beautifully suffered backgrounds. And it's important for us to honor that. So even just little things like that, where that acknowledgement wasn't there, not to say that the people leading classes weren't understanding. There just is a different level of unraveling that happens when you are involved in a spiritual practice and you do have a minority background, right? Like it's so multi-layered. And I feel like those were those tiny, it was like death by 1,000 paper cuts. You don't really notice those small things in your journey to, getting well, or on your journey to healing. But for me, and maybe for people like you or people like us, like we notice those things. Like we see when we're not being represented, or when there's certain language that we didn't create that we abide by because that's the way things are. So I think that for me, going into this field, I wanted to create language around honoring our ancestors and around cultivating the practice of mindfulness and cultivating that reverence to where we came from, not as a way of attachment, but as a way to create a bigger vision for our life.
I continue to go to silent retreats, yoga sessions, sitting sessions, but very little do I see people that look like me. I've grown up seeing magazines and billboards trying to sell me happiness. White, affluent-looking people posed with their hands in prayer position. I know there are brown and black wellness spaces, but not enough around me in my pocket of Los Angeles. Why don't we prioritize self-care?
I think culturally, we're taught that the race has already started without us. And we have somehow innately fallen behind, right? So we spend our entire lives trying to catch up. So why would we take any time to stop? So I think that that's the main reason why, specifically Black and brown people. And I think that we need to reframe that, I can't say we have to, there are absolutely injustices. There's absolutely people ahead of us, 1,000%. I can't change it. You can't change it, but you can change it for yourself. You can change the race of your own life, right? that finish line that you're trying to get there, there is no competition. You know, you are the only person on your lane. And I think if you start to think about it in terms of you're only competing against yourself, you get to decide when to rest, you get to decide when to go. It provides a little bit more space to take a breath and take a beat. And I think that most of us need to, rework that framework.
Thank you, Rosie, for sharing your journey with us, and I hope and know you will continue to help others begin their practice with meditation. You can find Rosie's work and hear more of her story by visiting her website, radicallylove.com. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to explore how yoga goes hand in hand with meditation with yoga teacher Susana Barkataki. Stick around. And we are back talking all things meditation and yoga. Susana Barkataki is an Indian yoga practitioner who is passionate about honoring the roots of yoga and connecting them to the biggest issues we are currently facing today, like racism, environmental issues, or anything that revolves around equity. How did you get introduced to yoga? Do you know your first class, or were you raised with it? Or
Yeah, it was, I feel like I had maybe 3 kind of entry points. And one was being raised with it. So with my family, when I was young, I had a lot of anxiety. I had a lot of insecurity. I was actually born in England. Then we moved to the U.S. because of violence against Indian families. And so there was just a lot of tension in my life. And I remember having trouble going to sleep and my dad guiding me in some visualizations. And he said, imagine this blue light, in front of your forehead, and then feel it filling your whole body. And then he'd lead me in a guided progressive relaxation, tensing and relaxing each of my muscles. And these were things he'd learned from his pundit, his teacher in India. And they really helped. They really, really helped. But it was not until later when I took a yoga class at a YMCA, so at a gym, right? Like in college, again, dealing with anxiety and stress and, the pressure of tests and everything like that, that I was like, oh, this practice is really helpful. It's really, really a place where I feel like my mind, my body can come together and I feel at home.
My producer said that yoga helped him with his anxiety. You said it helped you with your anxiety. Why does it help people with anxiety?
One tool that I find really helpful in thinking about why it helps with anxiety is I'm making like a little fist with my hand and I've got my thumb underneath my fingertips. So I don't know if folks at home, you want to do that.
Can I record this?
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Ready?
So
Show me.
This is like an oversimplified model of the brain. And this comes from Daniel Goleman. I didn't make this up. This is the idea that right here is our brainstem. So where we get triggered, pre-verbal, we're about to like throw a tantrum or we don't even have words. Here is our emotions. And we're frustrated, we're angry, we're joyful. Right here, our fingers are problem solving, insight, understanding. And often when we're in our emotions or we're feeling anxiety, we're here. And so we're not really thinking that clearly. And what Goleman calls it is we flipped our lid. So what yoga does is link up all the different parts of our brain. So we're able to problem solve, we've integrated our emotions, and we're working with the lizard brain down into your wrist would be like the brainstem. So all of our systems are working together, not just not aggravated or, stressed or in anxiety, but unified, a unified whole state. This is yoga, right? The unified state. So that's why it helps with anxiety, because it sometimes bypasses like talk therapy or the things that don't actually get to the root of where anxiety lives, which is in the body.
I feel that because I say this all the time, like therapy only works if you're willing to show up.
Yeah.
Like, unless you got a therapist who's a straight up samurai, like you got to be willing to go to that place. You got to be willing to go to the lizard brain, to go to the source.
Right.
And this is the reason I love being an artist, is that I think art and certain physical practices have an ability to meet you past your armor. Like they find the cracks in the armor you didn't know existed, that you weren't prepared to cover up. And then healing happens, or unity, or liberation, or all of those things. In your story, you say, I see a world where yoga unites us all and excludes no one, but that wasn't always my understanding. Can you tell me more about this? What do you mean?
Yeah. You know, even though I'd grown up with yoga, when I first went to try to practice yoga in studios in LA, I didn't feel welcome. I didn't feel like, again, I'm kind of like small, I'm curvy, I'm actually not that flexible, even though I've taught yoga now for a couple decades. I just didn't feel like me or folks like me were welcome. And I actually thought that was my fault. I thought I needed to practice harder. I needed to work on everything, right? What I look like, maybe the clothes I wore, my flexibility to be worthy of being in that space. And I now understand like that is just a misinterpretation of what yoga is. And I actually think truly most studios want to be inclusive. They just don't know how. Like I think that they want yoga to be there for everyone. I don't, maybe there's a few places that are like, oh, we're just the coolest and the thinnest and the most flexible. But I do think people don't realize that a culture of competition or exclusion gets perpetuated. And that isn't what yoga is. Yoga is a practice for liberation for everyone. So a paraplegic person could do yoga through the breath, through meditation, through visualization, through mantra, maybe, mudra in the mind, right? Because mudra is like hand gestures, or like a lot of folks might be familiar with Gyan mudra, where you touch your thumb and your pointer finger, the meditation mudra. But the highest mudra actually doesn't happen physically. It happens when the physical form, the visualization of that form, and your mind are one. And so you don't need to move to practice yoga at all.
How do yoga? I'm a big meditator. I practiced a lot of yoga in college. It was went to a weird art school. It was part of our curriculum.
Nice. What art school?
CalArts. So we did yoga, required 3 times a week. I probably practiced 6 times a week. I was, because I like doing things to the most.
But okay, wait. Why were they requiring you as art students to do yoga? That's fascinating to me.
We were studying acting, and so much of acting is knowing thyself, and yoga was a great way to physically know your body and know your limits. And this same teacher would also make us do sort of ecstatic dance and all of these kinds of things. So it was just part of the pushing our bodies to certain limits, or knowing our bodies better. We did Tai Chi as our course curriculum. It was very cool.
Yeah,
I call it
amazing.
weird, but it's actually very cool. It should be in many high schools
I wish.
as a requirement. I do less yoga now. I've chosen other physical meditations for me. I'm a big climber, but I am a big meditator. What is the relationship between yoga and meditation?
Yeah. So there's 8 limbs that we know from Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, which were written in around 200 to 300 BCE. And in those limbs of yoga, they're kind of like pillars or foundations. The first 2 are ethics, like a way to be in the world, how to be with each other, how to be with ourselves. The third is asana, so the physical practice. The fourth is pranayama, meditation, or breath work. The fifth is dharana, focus. And then there's dhyana, which is meditation. And then the last is samadhi, or liberation, joy, bliss. And so one of the limbs of yoga is meditation. So it's actually part of the practice. And in the early days, like if you were to go, if we could travel back 2,500 years ago.
Take me there.
Yeah, really, right? Like sitting under the trees, by streams, on the outskirts of villages, also towns. Folks don't necessarily know, but the civilization that existed there in the, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, we have now some of the ruins of these civilizations. They were organized. They were villages built on grids with waterways, with irrigation, with drainage. They had buildings and homes made out of brick. They even had what looked like healing centers, where there was like a central room and then small treatment rooms outside. And so this is thousands of years ago. It was in that context that yoga practitioners said, still, even with all the developments we haven't solved for suffering. We're not happy. And so let's go and leave society as we know it, not to completely abandon it, but to find some other way to feel better, to feel relief, to feel joy, to be free of our suffering. And so they were often wandering in the forest on the outskirts of these cities and villages. The Buddha was a prototypical yoga practitioner that we know a lot about because it was in that context of the Shramana, the renunciate traditions, that yoga co-evolved alongside Buddhism and also Jainism as well.
Sorry, Jainism?
Jain, yeah, Jain.
Which is?
The practice of Mahavira, who is kind of like the Buddha, like the main figure in Jainism. It's another religious and spiritual practice that developed in South Asia around that same time. And it's similar in many ways to Hinduism and Buddhism, but in a way it takes like if you're familiar with kind of the ethic of ahimsa or do no harm, Jainism often takes that even further. So you'll see Jains more in India sweeping the floor in front of them with a brush to clear the bugs away so they don't cause harm. They'll only eat vegetables that fall from the tree. They won't eat vegetables that it kills the plant for them to eat them. It's pretty profound.
I swept my stairs this morning.
Yeah. It's a meditation, right?
I have a deep practice of sweeping my stairs. I do it like once a week. And before I moved into this home, I swept the stairs. Before I even decided that it's the place I wanted or that I would get the place. Because I know that, how we enter a space and how we leave a space matters. So I love this sweeping stairs so you don't step on the bugs.
Yeah.
My partner is now a certified yoga instructor. She's the one who told me about you. She loves what you do and represent. She has had her own struggles with meditation, with things that I often talk about, which are the appropriation, which I don't like. One of my best friends is a white woman. She's one of the best yoga teachers I know. Like, she's had experiences where she was wearing like a Ganesh shirt that she got at Urban Outfitters, and a woman came up to her, South Asian woman came up to her and was like, "Why are you wearing that? That's messed up," And it's a fine line. It's a fine line between Lululemon and the practice and the heart of it and working out. And my partner is half white, half Mexican, and she's had her own struggles with this. Like, what is appropriation? Can I teach this in Spanish? Where do you stand on any of that?
Yeah, I love this question. So first of all, I think it's helpful to define cultural appropriation and to understand that it always happens in a system of oppression, right? System of power. So there's a power imbalance, meaning there's a dominant culture that may be taking from another culture and then the source culture. And so to just like give a really complicated, make a complicated thing simple, if you take like the crown jewels in England, they came from India, right? They were sourced from India. They're Indian natural resources and wealth. Where are they right now? In Buckingham Palace. And there's a big movement to get Britain to give those crown jewels back. Clearly appropriation, right? And in basic terms, it's theft. It's stealing. It gets a little more complicated when you're talking about like cultural knowledge or wisdom, which comes from a place or a people. Again, here we're talking about yoga. So it's India. It's a whole system of liberation that Indian folks created. And then when it's utilized by folks who are not Indian, so not from the dominant, not from the source culture, maybe from the dominant culture, maybe not, it can get a little, like you said, it can get a little sticky. It can get a little questionable. And so I like to say, really, you've got to look at two things. And one is there a power imbalance? And two, is there harm? And that harm is harm to the people that the practice comes from, like cultural harm, but also material harm. Like, are we actually essentially stealing or like taking profits or taking something from those folks? And so in the case of like, eating Indian food, right? There's a power difference maybe, but there's not harm. It's actually supporting an Indian restaurant if it's owned by Indian folks, if we go and eat there. Then when you get to yoga, it gets a little more complicated because, for example, if someone is wearing, a Ganesh shirt I think where I could see where, I don't know the exact situation, right? But if someone who's South Asian comes up and is like, hey, why are you wearing that shirt? It might be because that, for me or for my family, is like a God. That's like a divine being. And would you be wearing Jesus on your shirt just casually, right? Like, it's kind of a way of saying, let's have a little more respect.
Yeah. I like that question. Would you wear Jesus on your shirt casually? And some people would.
That's right.
Which is fair. We all get to make choices in this life. I went to a wedding in Maine. And I went to do a yoga class before the wedding, the day of the wedding. And it was packed. It was like 35 people in a room. And that was like, the room was like, wall to wall, like mats. And the teacher was Black. And not something I expected in Portland, Maine. And not a single Black person in the class.
Yeah.
It was like Black teacher, like Latino kid in the back, in the way back, me, and then a bunch of white people.
Yeah.
She actually, after, was like, hey, do I know you? And I was like, no, I don't think so. And she was like, you sure? And I was like, yeah, I don't think so. And then I did say, yo, where can I get a bagel? And she said, oh, across the street, there's this place, Roses. And so I go across the street. And she says, she comes into Roses and she says, I do know you. You wrote that book, Brown Enough. And I said, yeah. And she said, you saw my class. She was like, you know how hard it is to be the one Black person? Yeah. Sometimes it feels like in this town, and especially in this space. What would you say to her?
Ooh. Well, a lot of respect for doing what she's doing, because it's not easy. And I can speak for myself, right? Like, what helps me is having a Sangha, having a community, having other folks that I can talk to and that can support me. They don't necessarily have to be like me. They don't have to be South Asian, right? Could be white allies, white accomplices. A lot of, I have many colleagues who are white allies who I can, if a microaggression happens, I can say, hey, can you step in? Can you speak up on this? But it's up to every individual person of color, I think, particularly, and I'm curious what you think on this, how much they address those things when they happen, right? But you can tell from how she, or at least for me, when I hear you share that story, is like she's experiencing stuff all the time. And that's a lot to hold. And so I wouldn't say to someone, you have to stay in that situation. But if you are going to take care of yourself, right? Nourish yourself, get the supports that you need. And it's absolutely, you're right to ask for support from other folks. And then I tend to not go in as the only one. I find it really hard to be the only person of color. And so when I go in, I'll go with colleagues, I'll go with allies, I'll go with other folks, so we can just kind of like bring our crew into the space and change the energy, right? And also, so there's support if it's needed. And if it is your calling to do that, then amazing, because we need everyone to I think that representation is part of what's the change that's happening right now. The revolution that's happening is more folks that look like you, that look like me, that look like that teacher in Maine, taking up space and saying, we are what wellness looks like. We are what a yoga teacher looks like.
Thank you, Susanna, for making space, for creating an environment where people like us are welcome to sit, to breathe, and practice no matter who we are. If you are interested in learning more about Susanna's work, visit her website, susannabarkataki.com. There you'll find more about her practice and any event she has coming up. Until next time, y'all. Peace. Brown Enough is a production of Stitcher Studios. It's created and hosted by me, Christopher Rivas, and I'm also an executive producer. Our team includes producer Manolo Morales, technical director Casey Holford, production assistant Gabriella Gladney, and executive producer Camille Stanley. Original music by Casey Holford. Special thanks to Abby Aguilar. Workhouse Media is a contributing producer to this podcast. Carlos E. Hernandez of Ikigai Management is also an executive producer of Brown Enough. Don't forget to subscribe or follow Brown Enough so you never miss an episode. Thanks. Peace and love.